TV is making TV watchable again. Join us on the Active Kingdom Entertainment Network. Download Taken TV from your App Store now.
Over the last 20 years, with all your support, we've been able to not only launch the original MyPillow, but also the MyPillow mattress topper, Giza Dream bed sheets, My Slippers, and the MyPillow bath towels. But there's so much more. In fact, we have over 200 products, and I'm so confident that you'll love each and every one of them that when you go to MyPillow.com now, you'll immediately receive a free gift valued at $20 just for checking out the website. No purchase necessary. Get everything from MyPillow blankets, sleepwear, kitchen towels, mattresses, duvets, pet beds, body pillows, comforters, couch pillows, bathrobes, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get deep discounts on all MyPillow products. And remember, just for checking out MyPillow.com, you'll immediately receive a free gift valued at $20. No purchase necessary. This is a limited time promotion, so go to MyPillow.com now.
From the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
Welcome to this Thursday edition of Washington Watch. Thanks for tuning in. Well, coming up, I told you to brace yourself for the doomsday rhetoric from the Senate scare leader as the left tries to hide their dangerously irresponsible spending.
And we cannot follow the lead of a mindless few who believe a shutdown is a good thing and who want it, and who openly admit they want it. They're hurting the American people, plain and simple. We should not follow them. Democrats, Republicans in both the House and Senate should not follow this small band of people who are at the extreme.
That was Senate scare leader Chuck Schumer. We're going to talk with the leader of that not so small band of patriots trying to bring some, and I emphasize some, fiscal responsibility to Washington. Pennsylvania Congressman Scott Perry, chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, joins me in just a moment. And closely tied to the negotiations over the funding of government is the securing of our border. Now, the problem has become so bad that we have Democratic mayors like Eric Adams of New York City saying it has to stop.
Never in my life have I had a problem that I did not see an ending to. I don't see an ending to this. I don't see an ending to this. This issue will destroy New York City. Destroy New York City.
We're going to talk about it. And an attorney for the Southern Poverty Law Center was among the 61 violent protesters indicted in Georgia earlier this week on racketeering charges.
If you come to our state and shoot a police officer, hurl Molotov cocktails at law enforcement, set fire to police vehicles, damage construction equipment, vandalize private homes and businesses, and terrorize their occupants, you can and will be held accountable.
That was the Attorney General of Georgia, Chris Carr. Chris Gazik, Senior Fellow for Regulatory Affairs at the Family Research Council, will be here with the details on this case involving this anti-Christian, anti-police organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which we know a little bit about. Now, you thought I was joking yesterday about this new variant of COVID, what I'm calling the election variant. Well, guess what, as President Biden likes to ask? Yesterday, the World Health Organization, that is the WHO, which should be defunct, quite frankly, because of their abysmal failure during the COVID pandemic, is sounding the alarm over rising COVID rates. Now, will this be used to fuel mandates for ineffective practices like we saw 2 years ago? Well, we're going to ask Dr. Andrew Bostom, clinical trialist and former associate professor of family medicine at Brown. And finally, California, once again, leading the way into the moral and cultural abyss.
Today, I'm very pleased to rise in support of SB 58, a bill that will help Californians who are suffering with mental health issues such as PTSD by decriminalizing the possession for personal use of specified psychedelic substances such as psilocybin.
That was California State Assembly member Josh Lowenthal yesterday. Marijuana, LSD. Where is this decriminalization of drugs leading? And what's driving it? We're going to talk about that with Dr. Jennifer Bowens, director of the Center for Family Studies here at the Family Research Council. Our word for today comes from Galatians chapter 5, where the Apostle Paul writes this: "For you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." You know, there is a political and cultural movement focused on liberty and freedom, but in a much different sense than what Paul writes about. It is a libertarian movement that elevates freedom above virtue. Our founders, like Samuel Adams, warned of this. In a letter to James Warren in 1779, he said, "A general undoing of principles and manners will more surely overthrow the liberties of America than the whole force of a common enemy," end quote. Our founders understood the truth about liberty that Paul was teaching. We have been set free to do not what we want, but what we ought. To find out more about our journey through the Bible, go to frc.org/Bible. Well, the House returns from its summer recess next week, and it will have 11 legislative days to work with before the government's fiscal year ends on September the 30th. Now, since returning to Capitol Hill, Senate Scare Leader Chuck Schumer has been taking aim at the House Freedom Caucus, making them the boogeyman over their demands for fiscal responsibility as well as national security. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think it's extreme to rein in reckless inflationary spending? As we talked about yesterday, President Biden, his spending has doubled the deficit in this past year, $2 trillion. Is it extreme to want to secure our border and keep people out who want to hurt us? Here with me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Scott Perry, chairman of the House Freedom Caucus and a member of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, also a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. He represents Pennsylvania's 4th Congressional District. Chairman, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always good to see you.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Tony, and thank you so much. Unfortunately, we only have 11 days. We've spent much of the year not getting this funding package done. And so now there's going to be a lot of pressure. And of course, you got Chuck Schumer out there, the leader of the Senate, trying to scare everybody into continuing the status quo, Tony, which is a government that is weaponized against the American people in so many aspects. And yet the American people are being forced to pay for it. And it is an outrage. We had a deal with the speaker back in January. All Republicans were on board, and then the whole thing blew up around Memorial Day with that debt ceiling deal. And now they're demanding that we just continue to spend more money and throw fuel on the fire. Tony, while you know people can't afford their electricity bill, their gasoline bill, or their food bill. Credit card rates they're maxed out, they're high, and people can't get loans. Of course, the interest rates for buying a new home are out of sight. And if you want to buy a new vehicle, you're going to pay this outrageous price. This is all being fueled by Washington's insatiable appetite to spend money on things we can't afford and don't need. We've asked for a reasonable position, which almost every single Republican voted for in the springtime in the Limit, Save, Grow package. Essentially, Tony, just taking us back to the spending of 9 months ago. And yet Chuck Schumer says absolutely not. All the Democrats say absolutely not. And unfortunately, maybe some Republicans as well. We simply can't afford to keep doing this. Status quo must be changed.
Scott, help me understand this. So the Republicans are being asked to vote for a budget, to continue a budget. That's what a continuing resolution is. It continues the budget into this next fiscal year until we can get the appropriation bills out. But what you're continuing is a budget that grew the deficit. It doubled the deficit to $2 trillion. I mean, can Republicans really justify that?
I certainly can. And Tony, as you know, it's not just the spending that continues. It's the policies of the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer era. Republicans won the House, and we're expected to institute some new policies to stand up against this weaponized government in so many ways, whether it's the IRS, the Department of Justice, or you name it, that are destroying the American dream. We're expected to stand up against it. And the fact that we would even have to consider a continuing resolution is It just points to the fact that we didn't do our work and complete these appropriations bills. There are 12 of them. We only passed one out of the House. We should get to work, roll our sleeves up. I'm willing to stay up all night or whatever for whatever it takes, but we can't surrender before the fight begins.
Let's talk about the policies, because you're asking for some very straightforward policies. I played a clip at the top of the program of the mayor of New York City, who is screaming about the 10,000 illegal immigrants coming to New York each month. It's crushing their budget. They can't keep up with it. Isn't that one of the things you're asking to be addressed in exchange for moving forward?
Yeah, Eric Adams, I watched the clip on your show here. He doesn't know how it ends. Here's how it ends. You institute the last president's policy. I know that Eric Adams doesn't want to give the last president, doesn't want to say his name, doesn't want to give him credit. So we'll just say institute those policies, secure the border. That's how it ends. And then you don't have to declare yourself a sanctuary city, and you don't have to declare an emergency, and you don't have to ask the federal government and taxpayers from around the country to pay for the problems that you created. That's how it ends. And that's one of the requests that we've asked for. We don't want to continue to not only fund a Department of Homeland Security that allows people to come here illegally, but promotes them, but actually give them an increase. We're actually asked to give them an increase in funding so that they can more efficiently bring more people into the country illegally. At the very same time, the secretary is saying, now we're going to find a way to give these people here illegally work permits so they can compete against the American citizens who are paying for their cell phones, their lodging, their food, their health care, their education. It is an outrage.
One of the other areas, again, it makes perfect sense to me. Even you get Democratic mayors that are in support of what you're calling for. They won't say it like it is, but they're screaming for help. They want more money, but there's no more money to give them. Let's talk about, you're a retired general. You served in our nation's military. One of the other aspects that you're zeroing in on as you talk about policy changes is this woke agenda that has infiltrated our military.
Yeah, it's infected the military and taken the eyes and our focus off of what the military is about, which is lethality, readiness, and discipline. And so, among other things, we demand that we quit forcing the American taxpayer against the religious and moral objections, be forced to pay for abortions in the military. The military is not supposed to be about funding abortions and dealing with the ending of the life of the innocent. We're about dealing with preserving the nation's security and sometimes taking the lives of our adversaries. But these aren't adversaries. These are innocent babies that find themselves, in an abortion clinic, and the American taxpayer should not have to pay for it. That money should go for readiness and discipline and lethality to make sure that our American military is the most competent and prepared military on the face of the planet.
You mentioned the military and Senator Tuberville, who has put a hold on military promotions because the Biden administration is violating the law and funding travel for abortions. The administration's decrying the fact that they're not going to have a chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but Schumer was asked yesterday about simply having a vote on the floor. I want to play this clip and get your response. Clip 6.
The bottom line is this is a problem created by Republicans, and it's up to them to solve it. Senator McConnell, Senator Thune have said they disagree with Tuberville. It's now up to the Republican Party to get him in line. We're not going to shift the burden to Democrats when this is a Republican-caused problem.
In other words, we're not going to vote on the chairman because it'll expose that this is a political deal.
That's exactly right. And no, Senator Tuberville, and God bless him, is responding to the problem created by the Democrats, the left, and the radical crazy people that are happy to supplant national sovereignty and security for the killing of babies at taxpayers' expense. And I've sat in the Senate chamber supporting Senator Tuberville, and I hope most people do, and will tell him so, and I hope he stands firm. And, that attitude from the left is what's weakening the military, not the inability to appoint a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who will likely call China and tell them, the United States is coming, like the last one was willing to do. That's not helpful. Right. So I fully support Senator Tuberville's action, and I hope you do as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've encouraged our people to do the same. 20 seconds left. How does this play out when the House returns next week?
Well, I sure hope it plays out, but us rolling up our sleeves, getting to work, and getting these appropriations bills passed at the right level with the right policy, and then have the Senate defend why they're interested in shutting down the government or in exchange
in
for
recent
maintaining
years,
the status
Christians
quo
have seen an
of woke
accelerated assault on not just our core beliefs, but their very foundation. Now is the time to build on that foundation, strengthen our faith, and learn how to translate our beliefs into actions that engage the culture around us. That's the purpose behind this year's Pray, Vote, Stand Summit. Believe and engage. Pray, Vote, Stand Summit is a national gathering of spiritually active, governance-engaged conservatives, or SageCons. We'll hear from Christian leaders, worldview experts, government officials, and more. We'll discuss important issues like the sanctity of life, religious freedom, protecting students, strengthening families, praying for our nation, and how you can impact America's future from a biblical worldview. Together, we can believe and engage. Join us September 15th through 17th in Washington, D.C. for this pivotal event. Register now at PrayVoteStand.org.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us. The website, TonyPerkins.com. And coming up next weekend, not this weekend, but the following weekend, the Pray, Vote, Stand Summit in Washington, D.C. So check it out, PrayVoteStand.org. Apologize for that last segment. I was so wrapped up in the conversation, I completely missed the fact that we were out of time. Because my next question for him, and we're gonna track this next week. What does this mean for Speaker McCarthy? I think there's some trouble brewing in the House if the Republicans do not find a way forward to have a fiscally responsible response to the government spending problem. All right, it's going to happen. I'm telling you, watch it. All right, on March the 5th of this year, a mob of about 150 people overran police security posts at a police training facility that's under construction just outside of Atlanta. The anti-police protesters call the site Cop City. Well, among the 35 arrested that night, and among the 23 that were actually charged with domestic terrorism, was Thomas Juergens. He's a staff attorney at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, the SPLC claimed that he was a legal observer, quote, performing a public service by protecting the rights of protesters. Well, on Tuesday, he was indicted along with 60 others on racketeering charges, as announced by the Attorney General of Georgia, Chris Carr. Joining me now to discuss this is Chris Gasick, Senior Fellow for Regulatory Affairs here at the Family Research Council. Chris, welcome back to the program.
Good to be here, Tony.
So first, let's start with this. What's significant about this charge of racketeering that Juergens has been charged with?
Well, racketeering is it describes a complex set of crimes. It's organized. It involves multiple parties, and it can extend over a long period of time or a relatively short period of time. That's not so important in Georgia, but it deals with organized crime and an enterprise that is involved in carrying out the criminal purpose. And in this case, it was to destroy or obstruct the construction of this police training facility.
So it's not like you got a crowd there and they get all worked up over this and they go and they storm the gates of this training facility. This is something that was plotted out, planned out, and according to what was released from the Attorney General there, this happened over months and there were several activities involved in this criminal conspiracy.
Oh, that's correct. And you're exactly right. And in fact, I look at the SPLC lawyers' presence there as indication that it was absolutely not spontaneous, because, who brings their lawyer to a spontaneous riot, right? No. So this was definitely something that's part of a modus operandi on the hard left. The National Lawyers Guild is the organization that he was associated with as a volunteer while being an SPLC employee. And it's basically a hard left communist organization that's been around since the 1930s. And this is a sort of a left, violent left legal tactic, right? They sort of bring their observer lawyers to watch them destroy and attack people.
Let me ask you about that. Juergens and the SPLC claimed that he was this legal observer there to protect the rights of protesters. So how can you be a legal observer of felony activities? I mean, it's actually a crime to witness a felony and not report it. I mean, isn't he an agent of the court, as that's what an attorney is? Isn't he required to support the law?
Well, this is an area, I think that you've raised a number of good points, and there's a real tension here. So, in a lot of places, in a lot of jurisdictions, the left is able to get away with this, right? They're able to sort of skirt the boundaries of legal ethics and what's required of reporting. For example, police or prison guards who see crimes and don't report them, felonies, they can be charged with this crime, misprision of a felony, and that's a crime in Georgia as well. So when you get to like a civilian, it's not so it's not universally recognized that you're required to report a crime. Now, and a lawyer is a sort of an in between. It's sort of there's an intermediate status. What is your duty here, right? But certainly, you're not allowed to be a participant. And so in Juergens' case, it appears that he was actually, part of the group of people who overwhelmed the police. He wasn't just standing back. But even if he were just standing back, I think that I believe that the Georgia, law enforcement authorities are correct in being very skeptical of this whole sort of modus operandi of having these lawyers involved in riot, planning and protection.
Now, there's some evidence that have surfaced that the district attorney there in the Atlanta area, which is left-leaning, was trying to kind of cut Juergens out of the charges, but the Attorney General of Georgia is the one that made sure that his case was presented to the grand jury.
Exactly, and because there was domestic terrorism involved in this, and part of the crime or the predicate actions, that allows the state of Georgia to be a full participant in the proceedings, and therefore the local district attorney wasn't the only person in charge here, because they were going to cut this guy loose, absolutely. Right. But Georgia Attorney General Carr said no, that's not acceptable, and in fact. He was originally arrested and charged, but in the recent indictment, the one that came down a couple of days ago, he's charged again. So there's no the current law enforcement environment in Georgia is that this guy is not going to be allowed to walk.
Yeah, very interesting. We're going to continue to track this. Chris Gasek, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
You know, and what's amazing about this is that the SPLC provides information to police departments on what they call radical hate groups and such. They're anti-police. All right, don't go away. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk about the World Health Organization and their push to sound the alarm over COVID. I said, it's this election variant that's coming up. Well, guess what? It's here. And they're pushing for more government intervention into these policies. So are we going to see a repeat of what happened 2 years ago? We're going to talk with Dr. Bostom, who is with clinical trialist and former associate professor of medicine at Brown. That's coming up next on this edition of Washington Watch. Don't go away. More straight ahead.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. Leah Sheribu, a Christian teenager in Nigeria, remains a captive of Boko Haram for her refusal to renounce her Christian faith. Chinese pastor Wang Yi is serving a 9-year sentence for speaking publicly against the Chinese government. In Pakistan, Asif Pervez is on death row for allegedly sending a blasphemous text message. All of this because people in power decided different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. The website, TonyPerkins.com. Be sure and check it out. Again, Pray Vote Stand Summit coming up next weekend. Lots of activity going to be taking place. A lot of great speakers and leaders. You'll be equipped to pray, vote, and stand. Go to prayvotestand.org to register. There's still room, but you got to do it quickly. So today on the Senate floor, there was an attempt by Ohio Senator J.D. Vance to make sure our government does not repeat the mistakes of the last pandemic.
We cannot return to the failed policies of the COVID pandemic. I'm not mad that we screwed up. I made mistakes. Many people in this body made mistakes. What I do think that we should avoid is repeating the mistakes in 2023. Let's learn from the mistakes that we made instead of just doubling down on them.
No surprise, that effort failed. Why? Because COVID has become, a convenient political tool. As I mentioned at the top of the program yesterday, the head of the World Health Organization warned of, quote, concerning trends for COVID-19. Ahead of the winter season. He said that, quote, the increase in hospitalizations and death shows that COVID is here to stay, end quote. Well, we talked about that yesterday. Just learn to live with it. My question is, looks like they're setting the stage for Act 2 of this tragedy. Joining me now to discuss this and more is academic clinical trialist and epidemiologist, Dr. Andrew Bostom. Dr. Bostom, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to see you.
Good to see you again, Tony.
So, does it look like we're getting set up for the same thing we saw last time around?
Oh, absolutely. And I have a feeling it could be even worse next fall when we're right in the middle or coming to the final stages of the election cycle. I was very impressed with the bill that was put forth. And it's disappointing. I'm just learning from you now that it was not, that it was not accepted, because we know that these draconian restrictions not only failed in terms of reducing the spread of COVID and its accompanying morbidity and mortality, they had catastrophic socioeconomic consequences. So the idea that we might repeat basically what's a Chinese communist policy of control is just really shocking and abhorrent.
Well, speaking of Chinese communist control, the World Health Organization, which seems to be under the thumb of the communist, remind our viewers and listeners how well they did last time in handling the pandemic.
Yeah, they got whether it was through ignorance or deceit, they fundamentally mischaracterized the basics of transmission. They initially were skeptical of masking, but then, of course, embraced it. They oversold the vaccine. Fundamentally, just like our CDC, they got everything wrong. There's no other way to explain it, Tony.
So how do we chart a course forward, knowing that COVID is real? It's here. I'm not a denier of the fact there's COVID, but the flu's here too. Everything else is here. We can't live in fear of these things.
Well, exactly, and we have to realize that, first of all, even at its worst, the original Wuhan strain Alpha, which came afterwards, the infection fatality rate, the number of deaths caused actually by COVID over the total number of infections was grossly exaggerated. It wound up coming in very much like some of the pandemic flus we've had in the past, not the horrible one in 1918, but 1957, 1968, around 0.25%. So that's not 2%, 3%, let alone 5%, 10% that was being sold at the outset. That is very manageable, as we've seen from recent history. Again, 1957, 1968, where none of these draconian measures were deemed necessary, and it was also very age and comorbidity specific, Tony. It was not targeting the young, healthy, working population, basically people under 70, who comprise 94% of the world's population. The idea that they would be thinking along these lines again of restrictions and mandates, again, just is very anti-scientific, I have to say at this point.
So let me ask you this final question, Dr. Bostom. So we know the government's not going to change course. They're going to repeat, it appears, the same failed policies they did before. Has the medical community learned anything? Are they going to take a different approach?
Some have, too many haven't. I think it's going to be up to the public, Tony. I think there has to be informed, passive, obviously peaceful, but stout and resilient resistance to this. And I think, it can start in schools. We're slowly seeing the idea of mask mandates for children who are at such extraordinarily low risk from COVID, actually lower risk than from seasonal influenza. And I think parents have to stand up, just as they were upset about what kids were learning in school, and that came through during the lockdowns, with getting a window into home school teaching that was going on electronically. They have to just say, no, my child's not going to be masked in school. I'm not going to accept a COVID vaccine as a passport to getting entry to the school. There has to be active public protest against these measures.
In other words, we shouldn't be lemmings this time around.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Dr. Boston, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm sure we're going to be talking in the days ahead.
Take care. Take care.
All right, folks, you heard it. You know, don't be a lemming. Don't follow just because they say to do this stuff that we know that doesn't work. All right, coming up, California State Assembly. They have advanced a bill that would make the Golden State the third in the U.S. to decriminalize psychedelic drugs for personal use. That's next. It begins here, and here, and here. Every day. Before you stand, you need solid ground. Standing in a culture that wants you to surrender the truth won't work unless you have a firm foundation. At Family Research Council, we have that firm foundation, and you can find us standing. We stand for the value of all human life. We stand for the right of families to flourish. And every day we stand for your freedom to believe and to live out those beliefs both at home and abroad. We work with government officials, educating them on the issues from a biblical worldview. And when necessary, we hold them accountable. We equip Christians across America to be informed and to take action in their communities. With our daily radio program, television appearances, and vast online presence, we reach people where they are. We envision an America where all human life is valued, families flourish, and religious liberty thrives. And that won't be realized if we're not standing. Stand for faith. Stand for family. Stand for freedom. Stand with us at FRC. I'm often asked by people, Tony, how do you stay encouraged? How do you deal with all of the stuff in Washington, D.C., the negative policies that are attacking our faith, our family, and our freedoms? Well, you want me to let you in on the secret? It's called the Word of God. And that is why the Family Research Council embarked on Stand on the Word, a 2-year journey through the Bible. It's a chronological Bible reading plan with just 10 to 15 minutes a day. In 2 years, you will have covered the entire Bible. And to go along with this, Monday through Friday, I do a morning devotional that goes along with the reading of the day. It's all designed to encourage you on this journey because the Word of God, as the psalmist said, in my affliction, here's my comfort. Your Word gives me life. That is our source of strength. To find out more, go to tonyperkins.com or frc.org/Bible. And I invite you to join me every morning for our Stand on the Word Bible devotion.
This fall, believers from across America will gather in our nation's capital. We'll hear from government leaders, policy experts, and leading Christian voices, learning how we can engage in government at every level, from local school boards to state legislatures to Congress and even the White House, to win back the soul of our nation. Join with us for the Pray, Vote, Stand Summit. Believe and engage, September 15th through 17th. Register now at PrayVoteStand.org. FRC, celebrating 40 years with Congressman Randy Weber.
Well, for the FRC staff, kudos, hats off, all those kinds. I can't say enough good things. Y'all are helping hold up us during the battle. I know it's got to be daunting. I know sometimes it gets wearying. Sometimes you think, I'm not sure. Stay the course. God bless you. We're praying for y'all. We love what y'all are doing. Please, please know you are loved and appreciated. If it weren't for y'all in FRC, we couldn't do what we do. So thank you for that.
That was one of our True Blue members, Congressman Randy Weber of Texas. And I tell you, first off, I want to thank those of you, and that is probably almost all of you listening, watching this program, who vote because you're a SageCon, a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative. You send those people here, all right? And I know you get discouraged by if you watch the legacy media because they don't want you to know that you're having an impact. But I was actually sharing this with a pastor this morning. I was having breakfast with a pastor, and I said, we have more born-again, Bible-believing Christians in Congress than any time in modern history. It's true. And it's because you vote. And the Family Research Council is there to support them, help them, give them information on the issues. Also, our political arm helps get them elected. But we do that because of you. And we do it, and we're able to do it because of you. You help us do that. And so anyway, I do want to extend an invitation. There's still time and still some room if you'd like to join us for this year's Pray Vote Stand Summit coming up September the 15th through the 17th in Washington, D.C. It'll be at the Omni Showroom Hotel, and we're going to be celebrating 40 years of standing for faith, family, and freedom in our nation's capital. You're going to hear from some of our top Republican leaders that are vying for the presidency. They're going to be there to talk with you and to get your support. And, of course, there's going to be lots of other congressional and religious leaders there as well. My battle buddy, Jack Hibbs, is going to be there, Pastor Jack Hibbs. In fact, we're going to be doing an event Friday night over dinner. Anyway, find out more. Go to prayvotestand.org. So earlier this week, we highlighted efforts by the Biden administration to loosen federal restrictions on marijuana. All right, and I talked about that. Because I think it's a trend. We've seen states, we're upwards of about 30 states or so that have decriminalized marijuana. And then yesterday, California State Assembly advanced a bill that, if passed, it's already gone through the Senate, as it moves forward, and I'm sure the governor will sign it, would make the Golden State the third in the U.S. to decriminalize psychedelic drugs for personal use. Now, are these and other Schedule I drugs riding on the coattails of marijuana? I mean, what value? Now, we're told that, in fact, if you listen to the rhetoric surrounding this, it's about our heroes. It's about treating post-traumatic stress syndrome. In fact, there was even money put into the most recent National Defense Authorization Act to fund studies on the use of psychedelic drugs to treat post-traumatic stress syndrome. But what is really underneath all of this? I mean, how should we view this from a biblical perspective? Is there a spiritual side to this? It's interesting that even those who are advocating for this says, well, this enables people to have a spiritual experience. What kind of spiritual experience? Well, with me now to discuss this further, Dr. Jennifer Bowens, the director of the Center for Family Studies here at the Family Research Council. Dr. Bowens has extensive clinical and research experience working with survivors of trauma and abuse, and has also taught on psychological trauma and research methods in several graduate programs. Dr. Bowens, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to have you on the program. All right, I think you're muted. Let me hear you again. All right, I'm hearing you. All right, let's start with this. Can you share with us what drugs we're talking about when we use the term psychedelics? All right, we are having a technical issue here. Let's see if we can't work out the sound. Let me see. Can you hear me now, Jennifer?
Okay.
All right.
Can you
we
hear me?
are connected.
Okay. Yes, this is great. So when we're talking about psychedelic drugs, we're talking about a class of drugs that's also referred to as hallucinogens. And these have been on a Schedule I since the Nixon administration. So we're talking about a lot of years that these drugs have been noted as having absolutely no medicinal purposes. And actually, Schedule I also notes that these drugs are harmful. And so what we're seeing right now, which is a real push to not only remove them from the Schedule I, but to decriminalize them, as you said in your opening remarks. I'd just like to add a couple things here that I think are important for our discussion, and that is, when you look at the root word of psychedelic, which means to manifest the mind or manifest the soul, other researchers will refer to these drugs, this class of drugs, as entheogens, and which refers to the divine within. So right off the bat, we're talking about a class of drugs that are aimed at opening up the mind, opening up the person's spirit to other experiences. So that tells us right off the bat, we're not talking about your normal class of drugs, your Aleve or Tylenol. We're talking about an experience that's meant to take us into an alternative world, if you will.
Well, and you've actually done study on this because you've raised alarm on this for years. This is not something that all of a sudden you said, hey, this is a problem. This is something you've been looking at for quite some time.
Yes. As someone who's been a part of the study of trauma, I've watched for years as these drugs have been promoted through the psychological community. And I think actually it's a sad case study, but it is an interesting case study in how our society gets primed to receive certain ideas that actually go against our value system. Because I think if you kind of go back a few years, most of us still have those images in our minds of the hippie generation. And, if it weren't for the Jesus people movement where people came to Jesus, who came to faith in droves, we wouldn't have a lot of value for the 60s. We'd think it was just like a real hot mess. But actually, those images were important for our sort of collective consciousness because they helped keep us from harmful drugs. So those proponents who from the 60s, who didn't come to faith, who have been pushing these drugs and the use of these drugs in mainstream society, knew that they needed to change those images that most of us have of the dancing hippies. And so, as some political analysts say, we need to teach people how to ask for what we want to give them, what we want to feed them. So they knew that they needed to go back and find ways to make psychedelic drugs palatable to us. And how do you do that? Well, you use the scientific community to harness your ideas, and you push them as respectable through the clinical fields, through the medical fields, and you build them as breakthrough therapies. So am I surprised that we're seeing this legalization push in the midst of the rise of saying, hey, this is helpful for PTSD, this is helpful for resistant depression, etc.? Of course not. They're not wasting the crisis to move forward with a legalization pathway.
I want to read a quote from the actual author of this bill, California Senator Scott Wiener, who is actually he's someone I've talked about a lot because if there's a bad bill in California, his name is on it. He's probably the worst in California. He said this, he said, quote, and this is as he passed the bill out of the Senate, had the war on drugs not started in the 60s and 70s, we would probably be in a dramatically more advanced state around psychedelics. But the war on drugs, which criminalized possession and use, among other things, shut down everything, and we lost 40 or 50 years as a result. We're trying to reverse some of that damage. Is that not a rewrite of history?
I would say that's a pretty big rewrite of history. And, and that's what some of the political analysts would say is your tactic, is just keep repeating over and over again what you want the public to believe, right? So you keep saying, these are breakthrough treatments, et cetera. But the reality is that there are a lot of harmful properties to these drugs. Some people, one study said that 39% of those who used, what most of us would know as magic mushrooms, right? For those folks who have used those magic mushrooms, 39% said it was one of the top 5 worst experiences of their life. Some of the other people who are involved in these studies have already had previous experience with psychedelic drugs, so you're not parsing out the placebo effect. it is rewriting history, and it's using the scientific method once again to weaponize a narrative so that to get what certain politicians and proponents of these drugs are after, and that is we can't be blind to this. It is legalization. They want it just like marijuana,
right,
to be available in every state.
So Dr. Bowens, let me go back to a point that you mentioned. I mentioned at the beginning, the advocates of this, while not pursuing religious experiences, mention that this is a part of allowing people to have religious experiences, and this is what they're saying, and so I think we have to address that. There is a religious experience, but it's not in the sense that we understand religion in terms of what is good. You have some anecdotal experience with that, with individuals that you've talked to that have been exposed to these psychedelic drugs.
Yeah, and I wrote about this. You can find it on our website. There's a woman who was a part of some of the early clinical drug trials with LSD, and which is one of the drugs that's being decriminalized right now. And her experience was absolutely horrendous. It was a blind study, so she didn't realize what she was taking. She didn't have any preconceived ideas about the drug itself. But what happened is, as she was taking this dose, she continued to have persistent hallucinations, which is one of the side effects of these drugs, by the way. The side effects have not been well studied. All we're hearing about are the glory stories, so to speak, and we're not hearing the negative things reported, which, by the way, that should always be a red flag, because there should always be some kind of negative result. I mean, it's very rare to have a research body that, especially in the social sciences, that never has a contrary report. But that aside, so this woman, her experiences opened her up into the spiritual realm. Now, I realize for a lot of people that might sound a bit woo-woo or strange, but there is a spiritual reality that we are dealing with. And that is the purpose of a lot of these drugs. In many cultures, many different religions use them to access the spirit realm.
As Christians,
even in the Bible.
As Bible-believing Christians and looking to Scripture, this would be opening people up to demonic activity.
Yeah, that's right. And so many places when you're reading the Bible and you see the word witchcraft, or you see, for example, Moses's encounter with the magicians in Egypt. Those magicians were not just partaking in witchcraft activities to access the evil realm, but they were also doing it with drugs that we would know as psychedelic or hallucinogenic drugs. And because they were using that purposely to access the spirit realm. So these drugs are not something to play with. They are very spiritual in nature.
It's just very interesting that the timing of all of this, as we see a rise of lawlessness, we see increased demonic activity, that we see governments wanting to legalize more and more drugs that, as you said, and as the experts say, open people up to this religious, spiritual experience, but it's not good. Dr. Jennifer Bowens, I want to thank you for joining us, and I'm sure that given what's happening here, this development, we're going to be talking about this a lot more.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
All right, good to see you. And folks, we do have some information. I think it might be at TonyPerkins.com, but Dr. Bowens has written on this, and she's actually testified on this topic, and we're going to continue to track this. I think, look, we need to be discerning and understanding as Christians. And sometimes that means we have to say we are opposed to and say no to things that maybe the popular culture wants. And I know there's these trends, and we talk about marijuana, legalization and decriminalization of these drugs. Folks, it's dangerous. And there is a spiritual side to this, and it's not good. Check out the website, TonyPerkins.com. Also, make plans now to join us for the Pray Vote Stand Summit. Go to PrayVoteStand.org. All right, until next time, let me leave you once again with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul, found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you can do, when you've prayed, when you've prepared, and when you've taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.